Welcome to the Real Tea. I'm your host, Tammy Murphy, broker-owner of RH2L, bringing Miami Valley real homes to love.
And I'm Ellie Sollenberger to give my perspective as a home buyer.
We're going to give you the key to Miami Valley real estate.
Okay, so we have so many things that are just going on. Like we've talked about the NAR settlement, and we've talked about how that's going to affect things. So, of course, this is an ever-evolving, changing story, and still to be finalized and approved, but there will be changes that we're starting to modify forms in our communities, as well as the practices of how things are going to be handled. So this is just something we wanted to touch on pretty quickly and give you a little bit of an update. So as the buyers, typically the real estate commission with the sale of a home was covered by the seller, and the seller, through their listing brokerage, agreed to compensation being paid to the buyer's broker. So this NAR settlement, NAR is the National Association of Realtors, that settlement that has come out is stipulating that this is not something that can be done any longer through the MLS association. So that portal that we're used to using for that, it's no longer. So that is going to change a few things. The most important thing is how this affects our buyers, because buyers typically, as we talked about, were being told they need their down payment, their closing costs, that type of thing. But now they will have potentially the cost of their realtor that they're also going to have to pay up front, out of pocket, however that arrangement is made. So there will be conversations that take place. I just want to forewarn everybody, this is a mandated change that has come out of this settlement. It's not necessarily what we believe to have been the best practice or the best way for things to be done, but obviously sometimes you don't get to control that. So this destiny has now been changed, and it's going to mean, hopefully, that when you work with and you start talking with a realtor, that you're getting a conversation. As the buyer, you need to understand. As the seller, you need to understand. And that if you have questions, by all means, this is the time to ask, because how it affects you specifically as the buyer is that now potentially you're going to need more money out of pocket to be able to close on the house. So we gave an example of a $100,000 home. I typically tell people, hey, be prepared for 10%, and hopefully you don't have to spend that much. And our closing cost had been pretty kept in control where that wasn't the case. Most people weren't spending that. And you're going to probably be between 10 and 15% now, just depending, because all the prices have incurred and raised, and now you're fully going to be potentially responsible for that. Can a seller still pay for the buyer broker agency? Yes, it just cannot be done through the MLS. So as an example, when we were looking at homes and we knew that it was a tight market, a lot of low inventory, we knew exactly what we were looking for. We'd see the property come up and we knew we were off and running. So if we had a relationship, we already had that agency agreement in place, that was working. If you then were a new client for me and contact me and say, hey, I want to see this 123 Main Street, we would go off, we would decide, you're given information that I'm required to give you, and then we decide if we want to work together and create that agency relationship, and then documents are signed. So that period of time could be immediate or a little extended, right? Now, as again, part of this settlement, it's required before you can tour the home that you have to sign an agency agreement. So what that means is that there may be a form that, hey, I understand you want to see this home, but are you working with a realtor? If you're not working with a realtor, but you want to work with me, even if it's just to see this one house, we still have to go through the process of signing this form. So a lot of showings are going to be pushed, meaning you can't get same-day showings, particularly depending on people's schedules and how they're getting there. If you're coming from work and I'm coming from another showing, we're going to meet there. We're either signing documents out in the street, or we've had this conversation ahead of time and you've signed the documents electronically ahead of time.
So whose responsibility is it to make sure that's signed? The realtor or
Absolutely the realtor's
the
responsibility.
seller?
It's the realtor's responsibility.
Oh, okay.
So a lot of due diligence on the realtor is required, but it's going to be off-putting for buyers because I just met you.
Yeah.
And you just want to see this house.
Yeah.
But here I am, I'm forcing you to now have to sign this. Before, I would give you our consumer guide to agency relationships, because I'm required to do that by the state, that I have to show you this is what my brokerage is able to do, how we're able to work with the state blessing, right? This is how that works. But I didn't require you to sign it. I just was required to give it to you.
Yeah.
And then at the point that we created that agency that we wanted to work together, that buyer agency agreement is something that we worked with, and it all made sense. It's kind of now required to do the buyer agency, and whether it's just for that one showing or we decide, hey, we might as well work it together and see all the rest of the houses. It's just that it's being done before you can get into the home.
So do you see a lot of realtors going to like a DocuSign?
Most of the realtors have already gone to an electronic version of something. I mean, that's been, you can thank COVID for that. A lot of companies went to the electronic version of a lot of those things just simply because it was more in line with the health requirements of what was going on. And they were slow to adopt it maybe before then, but there were still some DocuSign and e-signature formats that were available. But, you know, it's just unfortunate for the consumer, because that's how I look at it. If the consumer doesn't understand why do I have to sign this now? I mean, I don't know that I want to work with you. Well, do you want to see this house? Well, yeah. Well, then in order for me to show you this house, I have to have at least this paper for today or for this property. And hopefully everybody's going to learn the dialogue, the conversations that they need to have, but it's just going to be a flip of the switch from the way things have been to now this is the new way, and it's a little off-putting from a consumer perspective.
So can a potential buyer contact them directly and say, hey, can I come see this house?
Contact the seller?
Or however it's listed, yeah.
Yeah, so if the seller is listed with a realtor, then their realtor would be the person that would be contacted. And a buyer not represented could contact that realtor as the listing agent to say, hey, I would like to see this house. That then is a conversation that the listing agent has to have with the seller, because just because you show a house doesn't mean you've created agency. And this is getting into a lot of stuff. So,
yeah.
But it is a matter of, as the listing agent, my job is to market the property and to get the showings and to do what's best in the client's interest, which is my seller, right? So when I hold an open house, I don't have agency with the people that come in there. I'm holding an open house because that benefits the seller. This dynamic is going to shift that, because technically the rule is a buyer coming into the property has to have an agency unless they don't want to be represented by a realtor. But if they want a realtor, they have to have that document signed by their realtor before they tour the house.
So will you see a lot of open houses on day one when a home lists then?
I think we're going to see open houses, but I think there's going to be questions about how it's done. So the biggest thing in real estate talks about procuring cause. So yes, when you sign a document, you created a contract, you know that you're working with each other, right? You know that this person's going to get paid and this person is obligated. So that's pretty set in stone. Real estate has this thing called procuring cause, where you get a lot of times with a new home construction. People will typically go into a model home and they want to look around. Well, the person there who's probably not a realtor, so not held to this, not held to the same standards that I am as a realtor with a real estate license, but they will generally ask, are you working with a realtor? And if that person does not identify them, the builder is not obligated to pay the realtor for that transaction. Even if they say, yes, I'm working with somebody, the rule of thumb is if that realtor isn't there to cross the threshold with their buyer, that realtor is not going to get compensated in that transaction. So one of the things that I talk about with buyers is, one, if you're going to go to open houses, I'll give you extra cards so that when you're asked if you're working with anybody, you can give my card. Then if there's questions, we can communicate. But also if you go to new builders to see model homes or anything, that you can provide my card. If you're going to go to a builder, I want to know ahead of time. If I'm physically not able to be there, I can at least set the precursor and talk with the builder ahead of time, and I can pre-register. So those are important things, because that procuring cause, being able to say I have a reason to get paid when this house closes, means that I secured potentially that initial visit with the home, and then I had an agency relationship and I worked through the transaction. So there's multiple layers as to what is involved with getting paid in that transaction. Unfortunately, it's not like they show on TV where they just pop a sign out there and they show up and no paperwork are signed and people all get paid and everybody's happy.
Yeah.
It does not work like that, honestly. But these changes are really going to affect what people felt was normal, right? And we're all reeling from it still. The other part of that is that with those government-backed loans, FHA, USDA, VA loans, that those buyers really are with limited funds or have a specialty type loan where they were not able to pay for the compensation of a buyer broker. So they couldn't pay those fees. They can't roll it into the cost of the loan. And when we talked about this originally, we were saying a lot of people are having this discussion, and these companies are having to look at it to say, well, what are we going to do with this situation? Because if your buyers are impacted by the requirement for more funds out of pocket, if that's a burden, then they're not going to buy. So then you have the mortgage companies that are going to go, well, wait a minute, we don't have the activity that we need. Now we have to spur the market, which is where hopefully we get interest rates to come down, buyers come back out, and all of these variables, it just cycles through. So what's the most important thing for us to do? From my opinion, it's making sure that our consumers are being represented, that they understand what their rights are in the process, and that they have somebody speaking to their best interest. And that's the value that I as a realtor bring to them. Whether they're the seller or the buyer, I want to make sure that that value is there so that compensation is a part of doing the business. And it's unfortunate now that we don't get to say that the part of the purchase price that the buyer doesn't have to come out of pocket but understands is being paid to their buyer broker is to their benefit. And so all parties could get to the table and be fine with that. Now it's a little bit of a shake it up and let's see how we're going to roll with this. So what do I see happening? We're going to have people who take it automatically to the far extreme, right? And we're going to have sellers who say, nope, I'm not paying anything. I'm not going to cover anything towards anybody else. I'm only going to pay what I'm responsible for. So the seller will contract with a listing agent and they will strictly agree to and only pay for their side. But in any of the marketing or advertising that I do for that particular property, it's going to cast a net, right? It's not going to cast the wide net, because who's working for free?
Yeah.
Buyer's agent is going to want to know that they're going to get compensated.
But I thought you couldn't say on there that they're not paying.
You can't put it in the MLS. You can't put it in the MLS.
But you can put it
But I
out.
can say, I'm the listing agent, so you as another realtor would call me and say, hey Tammy, I've got a buyer potentially for that new listing you just did. Is your seller compensating for a buyer agency? Yes, they are. As a matter of fact, here's what we're doing. Great. Okay, I'll bring my buyer through. Let's see if we can work together. So now it's going to be a call or an email or a text message, or on my website for my brokerage, we will put it on there, because that's a part of our advertising that we do for our listings, is that it will indicate the compensation if the seller is agreeable to that. But a seller taking the decision that they don't want to pay for that, that's their right. They can certainly do that. It's just, how many people are you going to get out of the buyer pool if the buyer says, well, I don't want to do that because I don't want to have to pay the additional money out of pocket when I already have my down payment and my closing cost in order to get into the house. So again, the extremes are going to test the waters to see, and then you're going to have buyer brokers who are going to bottom dollar discount, flat rate, a la carte their charges, so that, well, I'm going to charge you each time I have to take you out to show you something, or I'm going to do. We will probably see every variety of things going on. And again, I don't know that that's in the best interest of the consumer, Because as the consumer, you just want to know that if you are working with me, whatever you need from me to show a house, to be there through the inspection, to help negotiate, any of those things, that I'm there. I'm not nickel and diming you each time that you need a phone call. That feels like what?
That's like an attorney.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I don't get the bill for those 15 minutes on a phone call, but maybe there's a way that you see some of that coming out. And that's the unfortunate part. So now the VA just released yesterday that they are going to give a temporary approval for VA buyers to be able to pay for their buyer broker fee if that is necessary. And I take that a little
in the
personally.
Loan or out?
Not a part of the loan.
Okay.
It cannot be rolled into the loan. So they want to keep the loan very clear that it is strictly on the home. And Fannie and Freddie haven't yet come out with that for the FHA ruling to know how that's going to be. We think that the industry standards will kind of come together. And then what's going to happen is what happens in the first 3 months when all of this is taken effect. So how is August, September, and October in the year? Normally we get a little bit of a slowdown because it's back to school and it's all of this stuff going on, and it's right
Trust
before.
me, I know.
You do.
Yeah.
And so if we have a normal slowing, but now we have it predicated by all of these changes, and now there's even more slowing, you're going to see panic throughout those organizations. They're going to go, oh crap, what did we do? We need to change this. We need to allow this. So that's, again, what's in the best interest of the consumer is a consistent, manageable, understandable, reliable source of how the process goes.
Yeah.
And when you start shaking it up, then you cause confusion. And me speaking with my hands today, I keep hitting that. You cause the confusion and you cause the worry. So if a buyer is like, well, I'm already having to pay higher for the price of the home, I'm paying higher on the interest rate, and now I'm going to have higher out-of-pocket cost, that's a triple negative effect for the buyer. I think we do see them cooling off.
Wow. So I was reading an article online that there is an MLS that said, absolutely not, we're still going to put it on there, that it is a freedom of speech thing. And I think it was an MLS somewhere on the East Coast, but they said they're still going to put it on the MLS. And basically they wrote a letter to the Department of Justice and said, you can't tell us that we can't. It's freedom of speech. I can say what I want in my listing.
And there are definitely there's a lot of opinions out there as to what's going on. First of all, this case stemmed from several years back with the DOJ, and there was an agreement that was reached. And when you reach an agreement, then isn't that settled? But the DOJ has reopened it, and all of this now is as a result of that. And it is very concerning to realize how much impact is actually being made. And I take it because I'm a private business owner. So you're affecting my right to be able, as an entrepreneur, to be able to conduct my business the way that I need to, as well as my professionalism and knowing what I stand for to represent for my clients, that I've always used a buyer broker agreement. So I'm not a party to this negativity that's gone on. And one bad apple, of course, can ruin it for everybody. But I don't think that that's the way that we successfully accomplish what was wanting to be done. Could we make improvements? Always. We could always make improvements, but that doesn't mean you shake everything up to where it just dismantles. And that's what it feels like, is that real estate as a whole, as an industry, is being dismantled. Do you really want to buy a house from just Joe Blow off of the street who doesn't really have to have licensure or training or experience or a fiduciary responsibility, meaning that they absolutely have to work in your best interest, or you could sue them? In other countries, that's the way real estate is transacted. It's literally the same as you want to buy and sell a car. You can buy and sell a house. So I've looked at it as, what is the bigger picture here? What is going on? Because this feels like it's not a corrective action. It's not, hey, let's do this better. This is, we're going to dismantle it. And the people that are the most impacted are first-time buyers, people who need to downsize, people who are with limited funds coming into home ownership. And home ownership is, again, we've said this, it's the number one way that most people generate wealth, or at least the opportunity to some wealth. And not being able to do that is certainly restrictive. And if you're talking about a class of people, then it's discrimination. It's a violation of fair housing. And so we have other states that are talking about what are they going to do with their homeless population, and they can't stay on the sidewalks. And you hear about this and people are screaming that, wait a minute, isn't it a person's right to be able to have a home? Isn't it their right, if that home is a tent, that they get to live in their tent? We're infringing on home ownership rights during this process as well. And so it feels like, what's the bigger play?
So do you feel like this could potentially go up to the Supreme Court?
I would be surprised if there isn't a bigger class action lawsuit that comes out of this. I would be surprised if people don't figure out, I said this, for 4 years, VA buyers have basically been shut out of our area because we've had low inventory. Sellers have been pretty much able to pick what contract they want to work with. And, if you're an FHA or you're a VA buyer, I don't want to deal with it. I only want to deal with conventional. And I strongly felt that there was definitely a grounds for the veterans to be represented and say, hey, we're being left out here. We have the right to be able to use our VA loan, but we can't get a seller to work with us. Something's wrong.
Yeah.
And I don't know that isn't still the case.
Well, when does this all take effect?
So it officially goes into effect August 17th. You're going to start seeing people and companies start making those changes. The forms are being revised as we speak. And so this will probably start, I'm going to say mid-July, end of July, that people will start feeling, a little bit of the pains of what we're dealing with. And it's still subject to change. So I don't know that it's 100% stone, this is the way it's going to be. But with companies settling out, they don't do appeals when they've settled. It's
right,
pretty
but
much
there could be
gone
another
forward.
lawsuit that comes forward, especially when they're talking about the freedom of speech one that's coming out now.
Yeah. And, that's where we look at, hopefully NAR stood up for its membership base, right? Because I've paid my dues over the years for that.
Right.
And to feel like maybe that didn't get represented the way that I would have wanted it to be represented, it does feel like it's a miss. And so now if we're talking about at our local association level, then I certainly want them to be standing up for what's right and representing as well. And if they don't, then, we're shut out of business. How does that overreach not get the smackdown at that point?
Yeah. And before we've talked about that there was just another association that was formed. Is that picking up any traction or anything changed with that?
Yeah, there's a lot of conversations that are taking place. And again, I don't know that it's for the best interest of the consumer, but people have to do what they have to do in order to work. Right? And you want to be able to function. You want to be able to do a business that you feel like you have the ability to perform for somebody. And it's not a matter of doing it for free, but a lot of realtors go through a lot of the motions of the process and they don't get paid because the deal doesn't close.
Right.
So there have been instances where realtors have done a lot of work and it's been basically for free. We can't advertise that we work for free because there's this idea that we're going to be compensated when it closes. But to get there, you don't know the turmoil and the time and the efforts that go through it always. So
Yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next coming months.
We'll just keep staying tuned and figure out what we're going to do.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us today on the Realty Podcast. If you enjoyed the knowledge and entertainment today, please subscribe and share with your friends. We will be embarking on a journey that bridges the gap between realtors and clients, uncovering the heart and tea of real estate.